Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GMF webinar on how to kickstart affordable housing retrofits with new GMF study grants. I'm Ann Byesenhart, a project coordinator here at the Green Municipal Fund, and I'll be facilitating today's session. I'm also joined by my colleagues Sandrine Hunzimana, Yen T, and Stephanie Pino, who are producing this session, as well as our colleagues from the SAW funding team, Yulana Fries and Alex Claro. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping items to get through. Next slide, please. Today's event will be taking place in English with French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation, you can click the interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. It's a little globe. The webinar
today will be held in English with interpretation in French. If you would like to have access to the interpretation in French, please click on the interpretation button, which is located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You'll see a little globe, and then choose the option French.
We have two separate slide decks in English and French. See the options at the top of the screen to switch between the two. As we move through our presentations today, I ask that you submit your questions to the Q&A box as they come up. We will address them during the overall Q&A at the end. You are also welcome to ask questions through the chat box in the language of your choice during presentations. We'll keep an eye out for any clarification questions and we'll strive to answer. Next slide, please. We will begin this event by acknowledging that we are gathering from FCM's offices, which are located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose continued presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Ottawa is located at the heart of three rivers, the Ottawa River, also known as the Kitchissippi in Anishinaabe-Moan, the Gatineau River, and the Rideau River, and has been a natural meeting place for the Anishinaabe Algonquin people for thousands of years. As we meet today to learn about how to move future housing retrofit projects forward, I invite you to share where you are joining from in the chat and to reflect on how your work is actively improving the environment of the land on which you live and work. Next slide. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Green Municipal Fund, we are a program of $2.4 billion funded by the Government of Canada and implemented by FCM. We offer a unique mix of funding and capacity building to deliver clear environmental, economic, and social impact across Canada. Next slide. Today's webinar is brought to you by GMF's Sustainable Affordable Housing Program, or SAW for short. The SAW initiative was launched in 2020 to help not-for-profits, co-ops, and municipalities take on energy efficiency projects. Since then, the program has supported more than 3,700 units of affordable housing across the country, reducing emissions, lowering operating costs, and improving housing quality. Over the course of the next 55 minutes or so, we'll walk through the latest SAW funding updates, eligibility and application steps, and how regional energy coaches can support your work. After the Q&A, we'll share some useful links and resources to help you continue your sustainable affordable housing journey. Next slide. We have an exciting lineup of speakers today, starting with Emily Hayes. Emily is the lead for Sustainable Affordable Housing at FCM's Green Municipal Fund. In this role, Emily provides guidance and strategic direction to the SAW initiative in its mandate to support the affordable housing sector in energy-efficient projects. Next up, we'll be hearing from Katie DeSormo. Katie is the Outreach Officer on the Sustainable Affordable Housing team. Her professional background is varied, with experience ranging from social services to arts granting to constituency support for municipal elected officials. Lastly, but certainly not least, we have Dami Dabiri. Dami is passionate about decarbonizing the built space. He has a background in engineering consulting for energy-efficient building systems, and extensive experience with deep energy retrofits. He is committed to supporting the non-market housing sector through the development and implementation of energy efficiency projects in partnership with affordable housing providers. Now, as we move into the presentations, feel free to add your questions to the presenters in either the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll pass it over to Emily to start us off.
Thanks so much, Anne. Really nice to be here today. Before getting into the funding itself, I just wanted to take a moment to ground us and what the Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative is aiming to achieve. So we can go to the next slide. So at its core, SAW is about supporting the affordable housing sector to undertake energy efficiency projects that reduce the environmental footprint of affordable housing buildings. We recognize that many organizations need support early on to make strong, informed decisions, and that's where this initiative is focused going forward. We're guided by a triple bottom line approach. So, from an environmental perspective, it's about reducing energy use and greenhouse gas emissions through more efficient buildings. Economically, it's about lowering operating costs and improving long term housing affordability. And socially, it's about improving building quality and creating healthier, more comfortable living environments for residents. We can go to the next slide. So, to put today's funding into context, I did want to share a quick update on where the SAW initiative currently stands. As many of you likely already know, our original mandate ran from 2020 to 2026 and included a $300 million federal investment to support deep energy retrofits and net zero new builds. At this stage, that original funding envelope is now fully allocated, and both the capital and pilot funding streams are now closed. And so we're now concentrating on pre-construction grants for retrofit projects, which is what we're focusing on today. And this reflects where we feel we can have the greatest impact with more limited resources, helping projects get started and embedding those ambitious environmental outcomes from the start. That means that funding for new build projects is no longer available. In addition to funding, we're continuing to support the sector through learning events, tools, resources, and coaching supports. And so today's session is focused on sharing how SAW can support you in taking the next steps towards a strong, well-planned retrofit project. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to start again with a little bit of grounding in what we mean by a retrofit in the context of the SAW initiative and why retrofit work is so important right now. So when we talk about a retrofit, we're referring to planned improvements to an existing building that reduce energy use, lower greenhouse gas emissions, improve building performance and resilience, and enhance resident comfort. So this can include measures such as upgrading the building envelope, improving heating and ventilation systems, electrifying equipment, optimizing building controls, or combining multiple measures into a deeper whole building approach. Importantly, a retrofit is about more than simply repairing or replacing aging components. It's about using those reinvestment opportunities strategically to improve environmental, economic, and social outcomes over the long term. This is increasingly important because we're facing, as all of you know, both a housing crisis and a climate crisis. And retrofit projects sit right at the intersection of these two challenges. On one hand, affordable housing providers need to maintain and preserve existing housing assets to ensure they remain safe, functional, and affordable for residents. And on the other hand, we need to reduce emissions and improve the environmental performance of our buildings. Retrofit projects create an opportunity to advance both of those objectives at the same time. So, with that context in mind, we'll take a closer look at the scale of the opportunity. So, we'll go to the next slide. So, buildings account for about 18% of Canada's emissions, making them a significant contributor to emissions and an important area for climate action. In the community housing sector, many buildings were built before 1980 or over 30 to 40 years ago, so before modern energy efficiency standards were in place. As these buildings age, housing providers are increasingly faced with major repair and replacement needs from roofs and windows to heating systems and other critical building components. This means significant capital reinvestment is becoming unavoidable for many organizations. So the question is not whether to invest, but how to do it strategically. Rather than replacing systems one at a time as they fail, retrofit planning helps organizations look at the building as a whole and identify opportunities to improve performance while addressing renewal needs. Taking this approach can help avoid piecemeal or like-for-like upgrades, support better long-term decision-making, and ensure today's investments contribute to future sustainability goals. We can go to the next slide. And so energy efficiency projects deliver benefits across many different dimensions, not just environmental. From an operations perspective, lower energy use means lower operating and maintenance costs. That helps stabilize budgets and improve long-term financial sustainability. From a tenant perspective, retrofit projects can improve comfort, indoor air quality, and overall health. They also help reduce energy poverty for residents that pay their own utility bills. And from a strategic perspective, retrofits help future-proof your buildings, improve climate resilience, and position your organization as a leader in sustainability. We can go to the next slide. And so this brings us to a critical point. The most important decisions happen early. When we talk about the pre-construction stage, we mean all the planning and design work that happens before construction begins. Everything from technical assessments and energy modeling to costing, financial planning, and resident engagement. Essentially, all those steps that turn an idea into a clear, implementable project. The pre-construction stage is where you define your performance targets, identify retrofit strategies, and build a strong business case. Decisions made at this stage can lock in building performance for decades to come. And without a clear plan, it's easy to miss opportunities, invest in short-term fixes that limit future upgrades, or incur higher costs over time. Retrofit studies help identify the most effective sequence of improvements and establish a clear implementation strategy. And so this is exactly where we hope our funding can support you going forward. Go to the next slide. So the big question is, what support is available from SAW? So through the SAW initiative, we're going to be going forward providing funding specifically for the pre-construction stage for retrofit projects. And there will be two main types of studies that you can apply for. The first is the one-time retrofit study. So think of this as grant funding for the homework that you need to do before a major retrofit. It supports the studies needed to design a deep energy retrofit where energy saving measures are integrated into a single coordinated capital project rather than phased in over time. The second study option is a retrofit pathway study. So think of this grant as creating the roadmap to guide decisions over the next decade or more, with energy saving measures introduced over a longer time frame. And go to the next slide. So we'll break this down into a little bit more detail. So for a one-time retrofit study, you can access a grant of up to $200,000 for a single building and up to $350,000 for a portfolio, covering up to 80% of eligible costs. For a retrofit pathway study, you can access a grant of up to $65,000 per building and up to $200,000 for portfolios, also covering up to 80% of eligible costs. So the goal here is to reduce financial barriers so you can undertake the planning work needed to unlock those larger capital investments. We'll go to the next slide. So just to get into a little bit more detail about the one-time retrofit study purpose, this is best suited when you're looking to move toward a deep energy retrofit with energy conservation measures integrated as one capital project. This funding supports the technical and design work, analysis of retrofit options, and development of a clear implementable project. We'll go to the next slide. And so what can you actually do with this funding? So we'll mention a few of the eligible costs that you can consider. So the study grant funding covers a wide range of pre-construction activities, including technical assessments and audits, design development and costing, and project planning and coordination. But it also goes beyond the technical side with other eligible activities, including resident and community engagement, climate resilience planning, and financial readiness work. We'll go to the next slide. In contrast to the one-time retrofit grant, a retrofit pathway study is about long-term planning. This is ideal when you're looking to implement energy conservation measures in a phased approach over time. These studies help you map out 10 and 20-year retrofit pathways that align with capital planning cycles. The goal is to reduce emissions, maintain affordability, and optimize building performance over the long term. Go to the next slide. And so a pathway study provides a comprehensive foundation for decision making. It starts with a baseline of current energy use and emissions, then looks ahead to which systems will need replacement over time and what upgrade options are available. It also includes scenario analysis, cost estimates, funding strategies, and projected energy savings. The result ideally is a clear, staged plan you can act on with confidence. We'll go to the next slide. And so before I pass the baton over to my colleague Katie, I just want to highlight what we're looking for in a strong application. Successful projects clearly demonstrate impact. So how the proposed study will lead to a future project with measurable outcomes for the building, residents, and organization. We're also looking at your work plan, budget, team, and partners to ensure there's a clear plan for implementation. And we'll also reflect on whether the project can be replicated or scaled to build sector capacity. Ultimately, the goal of these studies is to set you up for a successful retrofit project. And I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Katie to share more about the eligibility criteria and application review process. So over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone, and a big thanks to both Emily and Anne for kicking us off today. I'm going to be talking to you about eligibility requirements, and I'll be providing a high-level overview of the application process. Next slide, please. For those of you that are familiar with SAW, applicant eligibility remains unchanged. It is open to municipal governments, municipally owned corporations, and nonprofit mission-driven affordable housing providers. This includes not-for-profits and cooperatives, as well as eligible Indigenous communities partnering with or who have a shared service agreement with a municipality. Ineligible applicants include federal entities, so departments, parent crown corporations or subsidiaries, provincial or territory-owned housing providers, developers, shelters, and affordable home ownership programs, including any partnerships that may contain for-profit organizations or home ownership structures. A note, applicants from Quebec are encouraged to apply, but please review our application guide for more details on municipal requirements. There are a couple of extra steps necessary for submitting an application. In short, please review our application guide or reach out to me or the GMF info inbox with any questions on applicant eligibility. Next slide, please. So to be eligible for a one-time retrofit study, your project must seek to achieve at least a 50% annual GHG reduction and or a 40% annual energy reduction. The project must describe its definition of affordability as well as the project's impact on operating costs, long-term financial sustainability, and affordability for the provider and or resident, as well as other triple bottom line benefits. Next slide, please. To be eligible for the retrofit pathway study, the project must include at least 3 scenarios over a 30-year planning horizon. One like-for-like scenario based on standard replacement, and at least 2 higher performance scenarios meeting energy or GHG reduction targets. For a 10-year scenario, 50% GHG or 40% energy reduction. For a 20-year scenario, 80% GHG reduction or 60% energy reduction. The project must also describe the definition of affordability, as well as the project's impact on operating costs, long-term financial sustainability, and affordability for the provider or residents, as well as other triple bottom line benefits. More details on application requirements will be published on our website, and our new application guide, as well as a retrofit pathways guidance document, will also be available to help applicants better scope out the requirements of this type of study. Next slide, please. So not having mentioned specific affordability guidelines, it is important for me to highlight the following. Your application must clearly define how affordability is maintained in your project. Your application must demonstrate the project's impact on operating costs, long-term financial sustainability, as well as affordability for residents and the housing provider. We have some examples of approaches up on this slide, and they include meeting government or funding program requirements, common sector definitions like RGI or low-income thresholds, or other approaches that are clearly defined and approved by GMF. Overall, the aim of the study grants is to fund sustainable, affordable housing. But the goal with this approach is to remain flexible with affordability definitions so that applicants may gear their projects towards appropriate capital funding and align with common sector definitions. Your project proposal will be reviewed with this in mind to ensure that it aligns with SAW's program goals. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level overview of the application process from pre-application to a funding decision. Should the application be approved, the project will then enter a contracting and subsequent disbursement phase, but I will be your first point of contact to discuss a project's potential eligibility to submit a funding application to SAW. This first phase includes information gathering, so it might include a project scoping call to learn more about the proposal and answer any higher level questions you might have about the application process. At this point, we may also leverage rec support for any number of questions you may have, particularly involving any technical guidance or scoping questions. If the project feels like a fit for SAW funding, we will ask you to submit a pre-application through the FCM funding portal. This is so that we may be able to review the project scope in more detail and determine initial eligibility. If the application is deemed eligible at this stage, you would be invited to submit a full application through the portal. This is where you'll provide more details, including required supporting documents and a project workbook. This will outline the project's timeline, costs, and tasks for review. Once a full application is received through the portal, your application will be reassigned to a funding project officer. The project officer will reconfirm eligibility and application completeness, as well as provide guidance on the next steps of the process. Once the application is deemed both eligible and complete, the application is then reviewed by independent peer reviewers before a funding decision is reached. I do have a friendly reminder: being eligible at any stage does not guarantee that funding will be approved. So I'll pass this over to Dami now. Thanks so much for letting me cover the outline. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, and thank you, Emily, for taking us through the details of this new and very exciting funding avenue. I'm Dami. I'm an energy manager with the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. That's BCMPHA for short. I'm the regional energy coach for BC, and over the next 10-ish minutes, I'll be taking you through the regional energy coach program. Next slide, please. Like the name suggests, the Regional Energy Coach Program, REC program for short, is the network of RECs across the country that supports affordable housing providers with navigating the intricacies of retrofitting existing units or constructing energy efficient new builds. It's one of the three key ways the SAR initiative supports nonprofit housing providers, the other two being funding, like the new streams that Emily and Katie just talked about, and capacity development made real in the form of knowledge sharing and resources and events. The REC program is co-administered with the CHTC, the Community Housing Transformation Center, the Center for short, and delivered in partnership with a host of provincial and segment-specific partners. So whether you're in BC or the Atlantic, a co-op, Indigenous housing, we have you covered. We RECs can support your projects in a variety of ways that span the entire project lifecycle, right from pre-construction planning through implementation to measurement and verification. We're talking activities like energy walkthrough assessments, site or portfolio level strategic planning, project feasibility evaluation, finding and applying for funding from sources like the SA, project management and technical support, liaising and finding contractors and consultants, completing funding reporting requirements, and more. That's not an exhaustive list, but we can support you with all of that. So whether you're a municipality, a co-op, or other nonprofit housing provider like a society or religious organization, all of our support is available to you if you're in the business of providing nonprofit housing. Another thing to note is that the REC service is highly custom. It's like having a development consultant in some cases. Our regional segment-specific edge, along with the technical background and our ability to meet you wherever you are in your project, means that the support you get is tailored specifically to your unique situation, which can be pretty invaluable for projects as complex as the ones that we do. Next slide, please. A project that encapsulates the spirit of the REC program is the recently completed deep energy retrofit of Calling Ministries Dogwood and Cypress buildings. Calling Ministries is a society here in BC who operates 136 units across 5 buildings. Dogwood and Cypress are 2 of those buildings. Dogwood has 20 units and Cypress has 16 for a total of 36 units. This picture you see on the slide is a pre-retrofit picture, the before picture of Dogwood. It and Cypress are identical, so this is also what Cypress looked like before the retrofit. The buildings don't look it because Calling Ministries took great care of these buildings, but they were built in 1965, so these buildings were well over 50 years old when they were retrofitted, and they were in dire need of retrofits. The existing systems were single pane windows, gas furnaces in the suites. You can actually see the exhaust of those gas furnaces in this picture, and gas systems as well for the domestic hot water and laundry dryers. Next slide, please. The deep energy retrofit overhauled all of these systems and more. It included double pane argon-filled windows, through-wall heat pumps to replace the gas furnaces for heating, but also to provide cooling. Domestic hot water and laundry dryers are now powered by heat pumps. Enthalpy recovery ventilators were added to provide energy smart ventilation. LED lighting, roof, floor, and exterior insulation, complete renovation of the interior, from the hallways, common areas, the suites, all of that got a makeover, and a host of electrical and plumbing upgrades as well. As you can see from the list that I just went through, and also this after picture here of Cypress, it was an extensive retrofit. The residents essentially got a new building when they moved back in. It takes a whole lot to make a project of this scale happen. A driven, motivated society, a very experienced team of consultants and contractors, a whole bunch of funding, and a strong pre-construction phase. The strong pre-construction phase constitutes activities like energy studies, energy modeling, financial modeling, activities that Emily took us through earlier. And they were actually funded by the previously active planning grant through the SA, which unlocked funding from other funders, capital funding from other funders later in the project. And I want to highlight this last piece because it's a great example of the kind of nimbleness and funder hopping, if you will, that's often required to make a project happen. Next slide, please. So Emily touched on the importance of pre-construction, the pre-construction phase and pre-construction planning, and I'd like to just reinforce that message because it's the importance of pre-construction planning and the pre-construction phase is one that deserves its own presentation. And in fact, we did just that at last year's Housing Central, the annual conference that the BCMPHA holds. The Coles notes of that presentation, the one thing I like to tell folks about pre-construction planning, it is the most important phase of the project. Decisions made or not made during that phase will make your project or otherwise. So it's best to treat it with the thoughtfulness and intention that it deserves. This is a narrative I've heard repeated from different sources over time too. I was at the Passive House Canada conference in Vancouver a couple months ago, and one of the main takeaways is this outsized impact of pre-construction planning on project outcomes. Between my personal experience, the number of trusted mouths I've heard it from, I've had no choice but to have this piece of wisdom as very high up on my checklist for successful project implementation. Next slide, please. In addition to recognizing the role of retrofits in preserving affordable housing and achieving our climate goals, the two new SAF funding streams are also an acknowledgement of the importance of the pre-construction planning phase, as well as the gap that exists for this in today's funding landscape. Like I mentioned before, the RECs are able to support you regardless of what phase of the project you're in. And this is especially true for the pre-construction phase because, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it does have the highest concentration of levers to impact project outcomes. When you pair this funding with REC supports, you're looking at a great opportunity to set up your retrofit ambitions for success. All things REC, including the information I've just shared in this segment, can be found on our websites, which you can navigate to by scanning this QR code. We'll also drop a link in the chat. Yeah, reach out. Be sure to check out our page where we're looking forward to hearing from you. Next slide, please.
Thanks so much, Dami, and thanks to Emily and Katie for all of your presentations. And thanks to so many of you who sent in questions when you registered. We aimed to integrate answers to those questions throughout the presentations, and we hope to address a few more in the Q&A right now. For questions that are more specific to your context or your project, we ask that you reach out to Katie directly after the webinar for a one-on-one conversation. And a quick note that we have two colleagues from our funding team, Yolanda and Alex, who will be helping to answer some key funding questions today. That being said, we've got a lot of exciting comments in the chat and a lot of exciting questions to get to. So let's get started with our Q&A. Our team has done a great job at answering questions that were submitted through the Q&A throughout the webinar. So we'll start with a few that were submitted in the registrations. The first one being for Emily and for Dami. You mentioned that the affordable housing sector is going through a period of transition in terms of available capital funding. How does this new SAW funding help organizations think about positioning themselves for future capital funding opportunities now that SAW is only funding the pre-construction stage? Emily,
Yeah,
maybe we'll...
thanks so much, and I'll get us started on that one. And saw certainly a theme around this question in some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. Again, thanks to everyone. Really, really awesome questions, and there's been so much activity happening in the Q&A over the course of the webinar. So just to address this question, just wanted to point out that or sort of like highlight that as we updated the design of the program, as we moved from sort of that $300 million funding envelope to now lower funding amounts through the GMF Endowment Fund, we really wanted to be intentional in how we could use this funding to really help organizations become capital funding ready during this period of transition in the affordable housing sector. So I'll just mention a few areas where we aim to build in that flexibility to ideally allow organizations to sort of best position their projects for different sources of capital funding or ways that they can use a study grant from SAW to explore financing at the capital stage. So first, just wanted to flag that eligible activities do include the option of using that funding to develop capital funding plans and funding strategies. So organizations are better positioned to pursue future capital funding opportunities as they arise. And then we've also built in flexibility by broadening the affordability requirements. So those of you familiar with our previous offers, they were aligned with CMHC definitions. We've now tried to make that really flexible so that applicants can align with affordability requirements, whether that be with their municipality, their province or territory, or other funding programs. And then we've also made the energy or GHG reduction targets more flexible. And I saw that was a question and sort of a flag in the Q&A around how this didn't, the targets that we previously had did not work as well, depending on where in the country your organization is. So now organizations can choose either energy or GHG reduction targets, again, to help you align with a range of future funding opportunities and also to align with your provincial or territorial energy grid. And then also just wanted to quickly note that the retrofit pathway study option really also came out of this moment of transition that we're in the sector, so that organizations that are feeling perhaps not ready to take on a large capital project in sort of the immediate future could, but still wanted to sort of start and build that capacity and start to make those improvements. The pathway study option does allow for kind of a longer phased approach where you can build capacity, reduce risk, and sort of move forward in phases. And then the last thing I'll mention before I passed over to Dami is we do have a funders list available. We've had that for a couple years now. So that's there to help organizations to identify potential funding sources. And then, of course, our regional energy coaches are an amazing resource, a free resource to support project planning, funding readiness, identifying funding opportunities, really being specialists in their own particular region. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dami to share a little bit more about how the RECs can support with identifying funding and supporting funding applications as well. So over to you, Dami.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I really I mean, my part would just be kind of reinforcing what you said, because a retrofit starts long before any consultants are engaged or contractors are engaged. Like I emphasized during the presentation, the planning, the pre-construction planning is the most important phase of the retrofits, and there's these new funding streams directly focus on that very high impact phase of the project and set societies up for success whenever the funding landscape does change. I also want to say I'm particularly excited about the pathway funding. A one-time deep energy retrofit is great if the funds are available, if you have the capacity for it, if the impact on tenants can be kept to a minimum, but that's just one way of doing things. Another model for deep energy retrofits is the zero over time model, which I would argue is more consistent with the natural life cycle of building systems. The zero over time approach is one way you retrofit individual building systems over a longer period, aligning retrofits with the trigger points, such as the natural equipment replacement cycle or changes in the funding landscape. And this allows for a more gradual, more manageable, more intentional approach to retrofitting a building. It requires you to phase your retrofits though, and the visibility for this phasing is exactly what the retrofit pathway provides. And with the retrofit pathway funding, you can develop that phase plan to retrofit your building over multiple years, keeping you moving, making steady steps towards asset renewal and decarbonization. Yeah, and as far as I know, this is the first program that explicitly addresses that. So I'm really excited for the intentionality that it'll unlock for housing providers.
Thanks so much, Dami and Emily, for those answers. And I'll move on to another question that we've gotten pre-submitted for Katie. Katie, is there a deadline to apply? And what are the most common things that slow down an application, and how can smaller teams avoid those types of delays?
Thanks so much, Anne. I am going to also call on Alex for a little bit of this, but I can say that SAW funding will have a continuous intake. As it was in the past, without deadlines, no supply anytime. In terms of timelines, 4 to 6 months is standard from a full application submission, but it can vary. We'll do our best to keep you up to date on timelines if there are changes. As for everything else, I will leave it in Alex's capable hands to answer.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So when it comes to some of the most common things that slow down an application, and how applicants can avoid these delays, application timelines can be affected when additional information or clarification is required during the review process. So after an application is submitted, reviewers may require additional information or clarification to complete their assessment. And in order to sort of expedite things and keep things moving, applicants can help support a timely review by following the application guide when filling out the initial application, providing as much detail as possible in their answers, and responding promptly to requests from our reviewers for any additional information.
Awesome. Thanks to you both for going over all of those. And another question for Dami. For organizations with very limited internal capacity, how can a regional energy coach help, and at what point should an organization reach out to a REC? Do you need to have a project already in mind?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And yeah, I would say that's a situation where RECs are actually best positioned to help. I think when there's a capacity crunch, it becomes more important to spend your capacity on the highest impact activities. And so we can kind of help you fast track that phase of figuring out where to start. And this is relevant if you have a project in mind or not. Between all the RECs, we've probably seen some form of your exact situation more than a few times, and we'll be able to narrow down your to-do list to the highest impact activities and connect you with the resources you need. I also want to emphasize that, yeah, we can support you regardless of where in the project lifecycle you are. So yes, reach out before or project inception, but also before you complete a study, or when you're looking for capital funding, or when you're considering technical solutions for implementation, or when implementation is about to start and you need advice about tenant engagement, or any other point in your project. The REC support isn't specific to a specific point of the project.
Thanks so much for emphasizing those elements, Dami. And a question for Katie. Can you outline some tips for successful applications? And can you maybe give us some examples of FCM SAW-funded projects that exceeded the applicant criteria and successfully delivered?
Thanks, Anne. So while being eligible for SAW funding doesn't guarantee funding approval, applications are assessed based on applicant and project eligibility, as well as the overall quality of the submission. So this includes detailed responses requiring supporting documentation, a logical project workbook, appropriate project team capacity, and evidence of relevant partnerships. I would say a key tip for strong applications is ensuring that your application form and supporting documentation provide sufficient detail and align with one another. For example, if the project workbook does not clearly support the activities described in the application, reviewers might require additional information. We also recommend connecting with Sammy, with a regional energy coach for support with project scoping and planning. I think he's mapped out exactly why that's important. So if you're looking for examples of successful projects, the GMF projects database and the SAW resource library contain case studies from completed SAW-funded projects. You can take a look there. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks so much, Katie. And we have a question in the chat from Scott Mayer. They're asking, are service organizations currently supporting housing providers on deep energy retrofit planning able to submit applications on behalf of housing providers? Or are providers required to complete and submit applications independently? Maybe I'll send that to you, Katie, as well.
I may actually tap you, Lana, for the answer to that question, if that's okay with everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Anne, and thanks, Scott, for the question. Just as I haven't spoken yet, my name's Yelena Fries. I'm the funding manager for the SAW grants team. So to answer your question, I may ask you to kind of take that offline and contact us directly. I would say overall, usually the affordable housing provider is the lead applicant and they're partnering with the lead municipality, but there may be something I'm missing with regards to your question. So we'd appreciate if you could reach out directly and we can discuss a little bit more. So thank you.
Thanks, Yelena. And I'm seeing that there was another question from Christy in the chat, and they asked, the past fund had $300 million designated to the program. How much funding is available for these pre-construction grants? Maybe I'll send that to Emily.
So the question was how much funding is available?
Yes, for the pre-construction grants.
So maybe I'll just in case the question's broader, for individual projects, for the one-time retrofit study grant, it's $200,000 per building, up to $350,000 for a portfolio of buildings. For the pathway study, it's $65,000 per building, up to $200,000 for a portfolio. And in terms of in case the question was more related to kind of what our funding envelope is now going forward, it's a little bit of a moving target now because we're using the endowment fund, but our target is to support around 20 to 30 study grants per year. Again, that funding, there's no end point to that funding, so there's not a deadline to apply. It sort of rolls over year. And of course, I'll just caveat that by saying that obviously priorities do change. We're at the Green Municipal Fund, we're always sort of wanting to stay connected to what's happening within the broader sustainability sector and then within kind of the different components of funding that we offer. So as that changes, we would certainly be letting people know. We'd be publicizing that broadly and do encourage, which there will be a slide at the end. We do encourage folks that are just wanting to stay up to date on funding opportunities, both SAW and others, to the FCM Connect newsletter. And I think Anne will be sharing that information before we close off today. So hopefully that answers the question. Tried to cover a few different areas.
Thanks, Emily. And yeah, we'll be sharing information like that at the end of the webinar. And we have another question that was addressed by Katie in the Q&A, but we think it might be worth saying to everyone, from Philippe, who asked, que considerez-vous comme abordable?
What would you consider as affordable?
Maybe I'll pass that to Katie.
Yeah, it is something that I addressed a little bit earlier, and I would say we're aiming to be flexible with our definitions of affordability. So it's one of those things that I would recommend reaching out about, again, taking offline. If there's any specifics you have questions about, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can book time with me through the website. There will be all of that information at the end of the webinar. So thank you for the question.
Awesome. And a quick hit question that we have is, are GMF grants able to be combined with other funding sources? And I'll pass that to Katie as well.
The short answer to that question is yes. But again, more specific information to come.
Perfect. And another question for Emily. How do you keep energy retrofits funded when mold and health repairs compete for the same limited dollars?
Yeah, this was a great question, and I think really highlights like a good opportunity to talk a bit more about what a sort of whole building retrofit means. So we would really see, ideally, if there were issues in the building of sort of health issues for residents and mold, that an energy retrofit and kind of planning and scoping out that project would be a great place to start. So energy retrofit planning does work to improve tenant living conditions through improvements to the building envelope, ventilation systems, many other energy conservation measures would contribute to improved living conditions. And so if a building has mold issues, those should be addressed in the grand scheme of a retrofit project. And really that deep energy retrofit very much takes a whole building approach. And so not all components of a retrofit will be specifically tied back to energy saving measures. There will be many other things happening within that ultimate project. And so accessing a study grant from SAW can integrate energy improvements with other building improvements such as mold remediation, and then the eventual capital project would, consider the overall building health and safety.
Right. Thanks so much for going over that and clarifying that, Emily. And we have another question for Dami that was submitted before the webinar. What if we don't have internal capacity to manage consultants? Can a rec support that role?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And we definitely can. We talked about constrained capacity earlier, and I mentioned that that's kind of where a rec is best positioned to, or one of the situations that a rec is best positioned to help. So we can definitely support there. I will clarify that we're not the engineer, we're not the project manager, so we have that technical background and we have the project experience, but if we went into the project manager role or engineer role for every project, our reach just would not be as great. And so we take a coaching approach. We can coach you with best practices for project management, or coach you with best practices for engaging with engineers or consultants or contractors. But we will leave you in the driver's seat. And that also helps you to build that capacity so that when you do need to do this project or project of a similar type again, you're better able to do that.
Thanks so much, Dami. And I'm seeing another question in the Q&A. Someone is asking, during the retrofit, can expansions to the building also be explored to provide more low-income housing? I'll send that over to the funding team.
I can jump in. So we do have a section within the application guide around sort of additions and conversions. So I would really suggest potentially reaching out there and then reaching out directly to the team to discuss the project. There are limits on it, so I would suggest maybe doing that first, and then we can discuss the specific project scenario. Thanks for the question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Elena. And another question for you, actually, Elena, that came in from the registrations as well. Does a nonprofit or co-op have to have a matching reserve fund or capital asset leverage?
Yeah, thanks, Anne, and to whoever had submitted that question. So specifically for our study applications, it's not an eligibility requirement for SAW. We would recommend that you review future capital project funding program requirements that maybe you're aiming for outside of GMF to verify if this is a specific requirement for another funding program. What I will say is to please review the funding breakdown in your application just to ensure that your organization can cover the study cost not covered by the grant should the application be approved. So I think In the presentation, we had gone over that's up to 80% of eligible costs or up to 100% for eligible Indigenous communities. This could be, internal funds or stacking of funds as previously mentioned. Just to note that we will look at your sources of funding just to ensure the project isn't overfunded and may adjust accordingly. So I hope that answers the question. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, I think that does answer that question. Thanks, Yelena. And we have time for one or two more questions. So I'll ask Emily, for organizations that work with housing providers but are not housing providers themselves, what is the best way to support here?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think maybe a little bit connected to the one I'm just simultaneously trying to answer in the Q&A as well, which is more around municipal support, but maybe kind of broadly for kind of champions of affordable housing that don't have their own building, they're not an affordable housing provider, but are really invested in these projects advancing, obviously have a really important role to play. It will really, when I was sort of reflecting on this question, because it came in with the registrations, it really does depend on the organization and what particular kind of knowledge, skills, and expertise they have to offer. So I think that's sort of maybe a first reflection is sort of what, based on what your organization provides, what do you feel you could offer to a project? So it could be, we've talked a lot about writing funding applications. That's certainly an area where support can be provided. It could be related to resident engagement if that's an area of specialty. Obviously, technical expertise is always needed in a variety of different areas. It could also be communications related support. So lots, I think for many of you probably in the audience today that have undertaken any kind of, capital project, it is really, it's a big undertaking. It's a long process. Lots of different supports are needed. And maybe just at the same time, because I was trying to type in the chat, for municipalities, obviously they are an eligible applicant as well if they are a housing provider, but if they're a municipality that's looking to support housing providers in their community, something we have really found in the last few years of delivering this initiative is that municipal support has been really, really helpful to organizations. We do require a municipal letter of support when an organization applies. So that's one very concrete way municipalities can support by helping organizations navigate through the municipality, finding the right person, getting back to them quickly, making sure that letter gets into the package. And then, of course, I think, again, depending on the community context, the municipal context, there's, municipal champions are so important to these projects. And then likely lots of different ways municipalities can support depending, again, on the nature of the project and what municipalities can provide. Funding, of course, is always great. But again, support navigating through the municipal approvals process is always really helpful as well. So hopefully that answers that question too.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to that to both questions. Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you to our panelists for our very successful Q&A. We'll share the slides again, and I just want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, for your thoughtful questions, and thank you again to our wonderful speakers for sharing information on the SAW funding update, how to apply, and how regional energy coaches can support housing providers through their projects. In addition to our funding, and we'll go to the next slide, our capacity development team offers a range of supports to help move your projects forward. For instance, we have many case studies for SAW funded projects, and a retrofit case study is being shared in the chat right now as an example. We also have practical fact sheets, a curated list of funders that highlights funding opportunities for affordable housing providers across Canada, and a free building operator training course that's focused on energy efficient operations. All of this and more can be accessed through our resource library. I'll go to the next slide. So as we wrap up, we want to remind you that we're here to support you. A great next step is to visit our website and download the application guide to see how SAW could fit your project. We also encourage you to reach out to your regional energy coach early on for planning support, and to contact our outreach team if you have questions about eligibility or the application process. You can also explore our capacity building tools and resources to support your work at every stage. Be sure to connect with us on the SAW website, our newsletter FCM Connect, and through email or by phone if you have any questions for us.